October 1, 2021. That was the day of our session. It was also the 25th anniversary of the Portable Network Graphic, or PNG, or Ping if you want to go that far. A tweet came across my feed earlier this year where Tom Boutell expressed gratitude and his pride in being involved in the development of the said format. So I reached out to see if he'd be willing to partake in a fireside chat where he could share the experience, and he agreed. So here is Tom Boutell to rekindle the early days of the development of the PNG, dutifully moderated by Eric Portis. Enjoy.
Wonderful. So why don't I jump in and start? I'm Tom Boutell. I'm that guy who started the ball rolling for the Png format. That basically amounted to, I posted to Usenet, and I did not say, here is my fully baked finished format and all of you are idiots, because that's what everyone else was doing at the time. And it was, it was not a good scene. So what I said instead was, here is a possible framework for a format. Here's some parts I don't know much about. Maybe somebody knows more. Would anyone like to help? And that went better. So that is essentially what my role was as a convener, as a spec writer, and as kind of a final arbiter of things. Someone else used the term benevolent dictator, which makes me laugh. And how about you, Art?
Yeah, well, I work for Cloudinary, and we serve a lot of PNGs. So I'm super excited to get the opportunity to talk to you on the 25th birthday of the English format. So
Indeed.
I wanted to get started just asking how the ball got rolling. There was at first there were GIFs, and then I know that there was something GIFs. Something happened. So CompuServe sort of we have CompuServe to thank for the PNG format too. Could you maybe walk me through what that was like in 1994?
Sure. Now, first of all, credit where credit is due. Mad props to Greg Roloffs, one of the early Ping team members, who also wrote a fantastic history of Ping, which you can find on the interwebs. And I recommend it, and I, shamelessly cheat sheet from it because a lot of time has passed, since those days. So one of the things that his history has helpfully reminded me of is this all really started because Unisys invented a form of compression we all know as LZ77, which is what's found in a zip file. And then they, or excuse me, not what's found in a zip file, what's found in a GIF file. And they patented it. And then they kind of shoved it in a folder and decided they weren't going to worry about it, or they weren't going to worry maybe about software implementations. Then CompuServe came along, Bob Berry at CompuServe came along, they invented the GIF file. And they say that to their knowledge, they weren't aware of the patent, and they definitely weren't aware that Unisys was going to enforce it. Then one day, Unisys morphs from a real company into a patent troll. And on that day, they announced that they were going to start demanding royalties for the use of GIF. But don't worry, they weren't going to demand it for every GIF on your website. They were going to demand it from software vendors. But then again, maybe they'd do something else later. And, it was terrifying. I mean, people were used to the internet at the time was an open place and a naive place and a friendly place, all kinds of great stuff that we don't necessarily have today. But one of the things we have today is we're smarter about patents. So this was the beginning of trying to find, a good answer to the question of an unpatented format. And that kicked open the door to this massive discussion of whether the GIF should be replaced by something that was exactly the same but using zip compression, or something that tried a little harder. And so that's where that conversation began.
And you decided to try a little harder.
I decided to try a little harder, yes. Which that was the really ambitious part. That was the hubris part. I think the saving grace of my effort, though, was that I also decided to ask if other people knew how to do things better than I did. Because as I was kind of alluding to earlier, a lot of people were just kind of cannonballing into the pool of like, you got to do it this way, and everybody else shut up. Kind of a Linus Torvalds or nothing approach, I guess. Of course, he has the saving grace of being right, but these people weren't necessarily as smart as he was. I think when you're, just moderately bright like me, it pays to be a little bit more open to other people's ideas.
Power of humility. And yeah, and I know, so it sounds like it started very organically. I know eventually the specification was published by the W3C.
Yes.
How did that consensus build over time?
That's a really good question. That happened, I think, because we got more and more people who've been involved in previous efforts, like Scott Elliott, Mark Adler, Tom Lane, people from the so-called InfoZip gang, the people who worked on open source zip compression, people who had people like Tom Lane who'd done a lot of work on the JPEG libraries and specifications. So that gave it a fair amount of clout. And then some browser vendors indicated that they were going to support it or interested in supporting it. Netscape was clearly listening, Microsoft was clearly listening, and other efforts started to fade when people saw this was happening. That there was a growing consensus and a lot of contributions from people other than the original poster, were being accepted and actually incorporated. Really helped to build the momentum there. And of course, we started to actually put out specification drafts, and that gradually, evolved into doing an informational RFC, which was how these things were done before there was a W3C, and then into a W3C draft eventually. Of course, the browser support thing was funny because we thought that Netscape would be all about it. We kind of got that impression. I'm not saying they swore on a stack of Bibles. They don't owe me any beers, but then they decided to do animated GIF instead, which animation support had always been there, kind of napping in the GIF format, because on the web it wasn't a thing. And we just, at the time, we thought, well, this is a toy, no one's going to use this. Have you seen people? Man, people love toys. We all love toys. Hell, I eventually created a GIF camcorder app for the iPhone. And yeah, I do appreciate the irony, but it's like Super 8. I mean, it's a beautiful legacy format that has its own glory to it. But at the time, that drove all of us crazy because we were suddenly trapped, with a format that was never going to go past 8 bits. It was never going to compress well. And now it could do video and was on every single web page forever. So for a while there, we felt like we didn't have momentum, or we had very slow momentum. But then 2 things happened. One is that Microsoft implemented it, which I personally, a little bit, you should be skeptical, but I personally see that as one of the first indications that maybe they were starting to get it, once they implemented my pet format. Well, of course, I would think that. At first, they didn't do it with any anti-aliasing support. It just had, one color transparency, just like GIF, which was a big practical concern, but at least it was there. After that, Netscape had to implement it eventually. And but I think the point where it went from there are some pings around to there are pings everywhere was when, again, Microsoft implemented full anti-aliasing support. They implemented full alpha channel support. Once alpha channel appeared and nothing else could really do that on the open web, it was all over. Not for fun and games and little animated GIFs, but it was definitely over as far as still images go for many years.
Right. We still, Cloudinary still falls back to PNG for many. We do a transparency check, and if images contain transparency and we don't think you can read WebP, PNG is still the way, the one true.
Yep.
That's the killer.
Yep.
Feature.
Yep. And that's because of Internet Explorer 11 at this point, correct?
Wait, IE11 that finally supported.
IE11 does not support WebP, as I recall. I mean, feel free to correct me. But all the modern things finally do. But you guys, when I say all, I'm sure there's a small percentage that at the scale of Cloudinary is millions of people. So you can probably tell me, and I would love to hear, what are the browsers you still have to support other than IE11, of course, that just can't hack a WebP at this point?
That's a question for people who look at more logs than I do, but I know we still talk about it. So I found that history and read through it a little bit. One thing that struck me was, I've been watching my colleague Jan, who spoke earlier about JPEG-XL, talk about go through that whole development process, which has been going on for much more than a year now. And looking back at the history of the PNG format, you went from a first draft to the final draft in under a year.
Yep.
And
we moved really fast. As we feature frozen in under a year. Yep.
In under a year, and you went from a first draft to like running software in like a month. Like
something like that.
Yeah. What do you think? What's changed on the web and how things get done that it makes things slower now? Is it just that things are more complex? Is the community changed? Do you have any insight there?
Well, for one thing, we build bigger, badder, more complicated things.
For sure.
I mean, you can do some cool shit with, I don't know, HTML 3.2, CSS 2, and no JavaScript. None of us want to. We want cooler toys than that. However, some of our cool toys have pretty breathtaking surfaces, that have features to be implemented, interactions to be dealt with, and so on. At the same time, I mean, I do want to say, I think the web evolves. The web was evolving quickly, right about through Ping, and then into JavaScript, and then somewhere in the Internet Explorer 4 timeframe, it felt to me like the web froze in amber, and nothing changed very much for a while. Netscape stopped innovating, and eventually just kind of stopped. It took a while for Firefox to happen. And Internet Explorer kind of got, a little bit stuck in its ways through like Internet Explorer 6, very solid browser, was the best at the time, but then it really got stuck at IE6. Like I think South Korea, I think it was still the most popular browser until a surprisingly few number of years ago. There was a very long pause at IE6 in web standards. And then things started to happen. I mean, post Firefox, post the Firefox team taking the XML HTTP request that, again, Microsoft did innovate, like back in IE4 or IE5, and saying, wait, this is awesome. And, now we have internet that is fast enough, and building on that. And suddenly there was new growth in web standards. This idea of modern browsers, I think, made a huge difference, that there were modern browsers and not so much. Microsoft gets credit for getting on board and, making newer versions of IE and then making Edge happen. And even for retiring from the field and saying, okay, let's all build on Blink. All of a sudden, all the major browsers, except IE11, which is going away. I mean, Microsoft itself will not support it for their own cloud products after, I think the date has passed or it's coming very soon. And so all of a sudden, all the major browsers are going to be less than a year old in all but really annoying circumstances. And it's possible to say, I'm going to build this website. It's going to target the modern web. And there's a lot of growth. I mean, everyone's using Babel to compile their JavaScript. Mostly, I mean, certainly for packaging reasons, there's some reasons we want to do that for performance. But if you look at what all the modern browsers will let you do in JavaScript out of the box, it's pretty breathtaking.
For sure. Yeah.
Now, I know image support is taking longer, and the guys creating modern image formats are frustrated. And when I made my big valediction farewell to Ping tweet, right, the one that got this conversation started, people were like, yeah, but WebP is already old. And I said, yes, but my point is it's implemented. And so I do take the point that it's not as fast as it feels to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny, just thinking about speed and browser implementations. It's funny that you called out Internet Explorer as sort of moving things forward or being the thing that really signified that you'd arrived. In my memory, coming into web design in the early 2000s was that IE6 specifically was the thing holding me back from using more PNGs because it didn't have great transparency support, or you had to do some like ActiveX thing to get it to render correctly. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I could be off on exactly which IE version first nailed the first nailed the opacity support, but it definitely was the arrival of opacity support in the major browsers. I think that was the big cutoff where all of a sudden nobody wanted to make a GIF for anything other than maybe they had an obscure case where it was a few bytes smaller. We caught a lot of grief in the beginning because Ping is like a modern format with chunk size. It's broken up into chunks, and you can parse it into those chunks and work through the structure. And it's not optimized to be absolutely down to the byte tiny on tiny files like a GIF is. So it took a while, for those to stop dogging us. But other than that, I mean, if it wasn't animated, I think GIF started to really go away very quickly. Somewhere in the 2000s, as you say, is where that really started to shift.
Yeah. I take that you pronounce it GIF, and just talking about naming things. Another thing that struck me in that history was that originally it wasn't called Ping. It was called PBF. This was your original.
Oh yes, PBF, portable bitmap format.
AKA
well, no, excuse me.
butter format?
Oh, yeah. That's right. Yeah, peanut butter format. You know, to hear you say that, I wish we'd stayed with PDF because I would have loved it if people said, peanut butter format. That would have been much better. One thing I do think we did right is we included a pronunciation guide in the spec. And this, nevertheless, I mean, since that big tweet thread about how it's time finally to retire Ping and, thanking the Academy, getting pulled off stage and all that, I have been hauled into any number of, hey, Ping guy, how do you pronounce Ping conversations on Twitter. But what I try to always say in those conversations is, first of all, I'm thrilled that anyone gives a shit about this file format and that they are using it in any way, shape, or form. And second, it's Ping, damn it. It's right in the spec. Why are you asking?
There you go. There you go. And I mean, thinking about using pings for 20 years, 25 years, the thing that, you can render a ping now that looks great, right? It might not be the most efficient thing. You can't render a GIF that looks great. How much of that was intentional, building flexibility into the spec? Did you have any sense that people were going to be rendering, giant images, full color images in different color spaces? Like how did you go about thinking about that?
How do we go about thinking about higher order color spaces and how far to take it and so on? Or
right, GIF is pretty limited.
Yeah, GIF is pretty limited
as far as what it can
do.
We
knew. Well, I do want to say, I mean, I created, or maybe I should say, I compiled the GD library, and some of the old heads are groaning and saying, yeah, I tried to compile the GD library. But the GD library, which stood for GIFDraw originally, was a server-side C library for dynamically creating and rendering GIFs. Because, in that web 1.0 world that I was alluding to earlier, if you wanted dynamic images, that meant, the server side had to do them. That was how you would plot your graphs and charts and so on. And I created that at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, where the excuse for getting to play with it was that we were doing scientific visualization. So for scientific visualization, I don't think anyone would question that they might want more than 256 colors or shades of gray, and that's it, and good luck, But 16-bit was something that I think I listened to the Better Angels on the Ping development list, who advised that 16-bit would be a good idea, and I'm glad we included it, even though 16-bit isn't used super often on the web. I think it's great that this is a format that another of our concerns was that well, some people said, well, there's no problem, just use TIFF. And everybody else said TIFF is a giant staggering pile. It's a kitchen sink pile of every possible thing, and nobody supports everything that is TIFF. I mean, you can put a JPEG in a TIFF. It's just a box, It's like you can't give someone a cardboard box and say it's a computer. It's like, well, no, you could put a computer in that, but you don't actually have one. So one of the things we wanted to do was to meet as many of TIFF's use cases as we reasonably could without being a pain in the ass and making it, impractical to implement or frustrating to implement. So things like 16 bits, maybe because there were scientists involved, were included. Things like, 4 channels, including alpha channel, were included. Things like animation were not. Whoops. Was that a mistake? In terms of immediate acceptance, it was totally a mistake. But it was hard because we did all those other good things. There was an effort, is still an effort, is still a format out there. There's MNG files, which and there's several variations on that provide for lossless animation. And it's just a lot harder when you have to deal with more than 256 colors and the use cases in GIF. So that's why we erred on the side of a really great still image format. We did not do animation, and that cost us years in terms of replacing GIF, but I think it in the long run it gave us something that's more useful, and maybe will be around for quite a while. I mean, it may be a while before WebP appears in every medical imaging system in a dentist's office, but I'm reasonably certain that when I go and get an X-ray at the dentist, that he's probably taking a ping of my head.
What a feeling. What a feeling.